I am 98 years old, and I know you probably shouldn't be listening to an almost centenarian tell you about your life, but stay with me for a moment, because what I have to tell you isn't textbook advice. It's not life coach theory. It's not another 5-step list to happiness that you read, agree with completely, and forget by the end of the day. What I have to tell you came at a much higher price than that. It came from loss. It came from war. It came from nights when I lay next to someone I loved and realized I was completely distant, even though I was only a foot away. It came from funerals where I stared at the faces of people who had passed away without knowing how much they meant to me, because I was never able to say it when there was still time. You know this feeling. I know you do. The feeling that something essential is slipping through your fingers while you run around, work, answer messages, plan, worry, and at the end of the day, lie in bed with that subtle, nameless restlessness in your chest, that certainty that you are living too fast for the wrong things and too slow for the things that truly matter. And what I learned, in the hardest and clearest way possible, is that there is only one thing that remains standing at the end of life when everything else falls apart. Today, I'm going to tell you what that thing is, and I hope you truly listen, because I no longer have time to mince words, and you don't have as much time as you think. My name is Eugene Harlow. I was born in 1927 in a small town in rural Georgia, in a house with no indoor plumbing, with wooden floors that creaked in the cold, and a father who woke up before the sun to work on a farm that would never be his. I went off to World War II at 17. I lied about my age on my enlistment papers, because back then, a boy in my situation saw war as a chance to prove something, to be more than just a farmhand's son, to exist in a way that ordinary life never seemed to offer. I landed in Normandy a few months after D-Day, stepped foot in a Europe that was devouring itself, saw things the human brain was never meant to process, and came home 2 years later on a ship full of silent men, staring at the horizon as if they still couldn't believe they were alive. I survived the war. I survived my own youth. I survived work, loss, and time. And now, here I am, at 98, my body barely functioning properly anymore, knees that demand an apology every morning when I try to get out of bed, eyes that need 2 pairs of glasses to see what's right in front of them, but with a mind that still works, still thinks, still feels the weight of everything it has lived through. And that is exactly why I'm here, because I have something to tell you that I wish someone had told me when I was your age, when the world was new, and I still had the illusion that there was plenty of time to figure out what really mattered. You don't know what matters. I know you think you do. I thought I did too. But there is a difference between knowing with your head and knowing with your soul, and that gap only closes when you've traveled far enough down the road to look back with crystal clarity, without the fog of ambition or pride or fear that blurs your vision when you're still in the middle of the race. I've already reached that point. I'm past it, actually. And what I see when I look at my entire life, all these 98 years spread out in front of me like a map I've already navigated, is a single thing, just one thing, so simple it seems impossible that we spent so much time ignoring it. The only thing that matters in the end are the genuine connections you made with other people, not the money you accumulated, not the titles you held, not the house you bought, or the car, or the reputation, or the respect of your coworkers. People, real connections, the love you gave and received. That is everything. That is literally all that's left when you take the rest out of the equation. Before I go on, I need to ask you a question, and I want you to stop for a second and really think before you answer. Is there someone in your life, a father, a mother, a child, an old friend, someone you love but that you're putting off for later, someone to whom you still haven't said what needed to be said, haven't made the call you should have made, haven't given that pending hug? If the answer is yes, you are not alone.
Most people here carry that weight and have never spoken about it to anyone. Today, I want you to speak up. Leave a comment down below with this sentence, just this sentence: I am also putting someone off for later. You don't need to explain. You don't need to go into detail. Just that. Because when you write that, you aren't just being honest with yourself. You are telling someone who is reading that comment at 3 in the morning, alone, feeling that same weight, that they are not alone. Your comment might be exactly what someone else needed to see today to make a decision they've been putting off for years. Write it down below. I'm listening, and they are too. It was the summer of 1944, and I was in a French town called Saint-Lô, which had been almost entirely destroyed by bombings, and which we were trying to take back from the Germans, yard by yard, house by house, street by street. I was 17 and running with a group of 8 men, each from a different corner of the country, with different stories, different accents, different ways of looking at life. There was Corporal Davis from Milwaukee, who worked in a shoe factory before the war and had a 3-year-old daughter he never got tired of talking about. There was Private Kowalski, the son of Polish immigrants from Pennsylvania, who spoke little, but when he did, he said things that stuck in your head for days. There was Sergeant Morrison from Boston, who had done a semester of college before enlisting and carried a book of poetry in his coat pocket like it was a survival item. And there was Jimmy Reardon from Baltimore, 18 years old, who had enlisted the exact same week I did and became over the following months the closest person to me I had ever met in my life up to that point. Jimmy was the kind of person who could find humor in any situation, not the superficial humor of someone running away from reality, but the genuine humor of someone who understood that laughing is a form of resistance, a declaration that life still has value even when everything around you says otherwise. On a cold August night, huddled behind a ruined wall waiting for the next day's orders, Jimmy looked up at the star-filled sky and said that when he got home, he was going to stop fighting with his dad, that he was going to hug his mom every time he walked through the door, that he was going to tell his girlfriend he loved her without feeling embarrassed. He said the war had taken a lot from him, but it had given him one thing he couldn't buy anywhere: the absolute certainty that the people we love are the only real wealth there is. I listened, nodded in agreement, and kept staring at the stars, thinking about what I would do when I got back, the plans I had, the things I was going to achieve. I didn't understand what Jimmy was really saying in that moment. I only understood decades later. Jimmy Reardon died 3 days after that conversation, an ambush in a narrow street that looked clear but wasn't. He was 2 steps ahead of me when it happened. I was the first one to reach him. He was still conscious for a few minutes. He looked at me with those 18-year-old eyes and said just one name, his girlfriend's name, Margaret. That was it. Then he closed his eyes and never opened them again. I wrote to Margaret when I got back to the States. I received a letter from her a few weeks later.
She wrote that Jimmy had never directly told her he loved her, that he always found ways to deflect when the conversation got too real, too serious, and that she would spend the rest of her life never knowing for sure if he had felt the same way she did. I read that letter sitting on the porch of my parents' house with the October sun warming my face, and I felt a weight that wasn't just sadness for Jimmy. It was the weight of recognition, because I was like that too. I deflected too. I also thought words could wait, that hugs could be shorter, that the important people would know I loved them, even if I didn't say it, even if I didn't show it, even if I was always too busy to be truly present. I came back from the war and did what most men of my generation did. I found work, built a career, married an extraordinary woman named Helen who deserved far more than I knew how to give at the time, had 3 kids, bought a house, worked for decades with genuine dedication, and spent most of my active 40s convinced I was doing everything right. I had a family. I had a nice home. I had a respectable job. I made enough so we rarely went without.
What else did I need to be a good husband, a good father, a good man? What I didn't realize, or what I realized but chose not to look at directly, was that having all of this on the outside meant nothing if on the inside I remained distant. Distant from Helen, who wanted to have real conversations and got short answers because I was tired or distracted. Distant from the kids who were growing up around me while I read the newspaper or thought about work or planned the next step in my career. I was present on the outside and absent on the inside. And when you spend years like that, when you offer your body but withhold your soul, when you are in the same room but in completely different places, you create a distance that seems small every day, but accumulated over years becomes an abyss that is much harder to cross than it looks. The moment I truly woke up, the moment that changed everything, happened when I was 54 years old. My oldest son, Robert, who was 28 at the time, called me on a Friday night and invited me to grab coffee on Saturday morning, just the two of us. I thought it was strange because Robert didn't usually do that, but I went. We sat in a small diner near his house, ordered coffee, and he looked at me for a long moment before speaking. Then he said, with a calmness that cost him dearly to maintain, that he had spent his entire childhood trying to get my attention and never really succeeding, that he remembered nights when he needed me and I was busy, weekends when I promised one thing and delivered another, moments when he tried to tell me something important and saw in my eyes that I was just waiting for him to finish so I could get back to what I was doing. He didn't say it with anger. He said it with a mature sadness, the sadness of someone who has already processed the pain and now just wants the other person to understand. And then he said he wasn't telling me this to hurt me. He was telling me because he loved me, and because he didn't want the next few years to go down the same path as the previous ones. He wanted me to be present, for real, not on the outside, on the inside. I left that diner a different man, not instantly transformed, not cured of all my distances all at once, but different, as if a window had been opened in a room that had been shut for a long time, and the air that blew in was both cold and necessary. I went home, sat down with Helen that afternoon, and for the first time in many years, I truly asked how she was doing, not as a formality, not as the kind of question you ask expecting the short, everything's fine answer. I genuinely asked, with the silence of someone ready to hear whatever the answer might be. She looked at me for a moment, as if weighing whether it was safe to answer honestly, and then she answered. For 2 hours she spoke, and I listened. Things she had felt for years and had never said because she knew I wouldn't really be there to receive them. Things that broke my heart not because they were harsh, but because they were true, and because I recognized in every single one of them the cost of my own absence. That afternoon was the beginning of something, not a magical turnaround, a real turnaround, slow, built day by day, choice by choice, presence by presence. We spent another 27 years together after that. Helen left us 6 years ago on a quiet March morning with the sun pouring through the bedroom window. And I can tell you with the absolute clarity of someone nearing the end that those 27 years were the richest of my life. Not because they were perfect. They weren't. We had fights, hardships, sorrows, losses, but they were present. They were real. I was there. She was there. We truly saw each other without the layers of rush and distance and distraction that had built up over the earlier years. And when she died, what I felt wasn't the paralyzing regret of someone who knows they wasted their time together. I felt the deep pain of someone who lost something of immense value, but I also felt the peace of someone who knows they made the most of it, that they were present, that they said what needed to be said, that they stayed when they could have left and came back when they could have drifted away. I need to tell you about what happens when you neglect connections for too long, because most people don't notice the erosion until the ground has already vanished beneath their feet. Human relationships are like gardens. They need regular attention, constant presence, care that cannot be postponed indefinitely without a cost. When you go weeks without really talking to someone you love, when you are physically together but mentally somewhere else, when you answer but don't really listen, when you show up but aren't really there, the garden doesn't stop existing immediately. It just gets drier, more distant. The plants wither gradually, almost imperceptibly from one day to the next, but undeniably so when you look at pictures from 6 months ago and compare them to today. And the danger is that this process is silent. Nobody screams, nobody warns you with an alarm. The people around you simply get used to your absence. They start filling the space you were supposed to occupy with other things. They learn not to count on your true presence. And one day you wake up and realize you are alone, surrounded by people who love you, that the distance that has formed is real, and that it will take much more than an afternoon of goodwill to cross. I don't want you to reach that point. That's why I'm speaking up. A 98-year-old man who survived World War II, who lost friends in France and Belgium and Germany, who came home and still took decades to understand what really matters, is telling you right now, while you have plenty of time to do things differently. Number 1, say what needs to be said today. Not tomorrow, not when you find the perfect moment, because the perfect moment doesn't exist. It's a fiction you create to put off what you're afraid to do. Does the person you love know that you love them? Not in a vague way, not just because you've never had a major blowout, but explicitly, spoken with real words, with real presence. If the answer is no, or if you have any doubts whatsoever, you have an assignment for today. Not for the week, for today, when this video ends, because I saw Jimmy Reardon die without saying what he needed to say, and I saw Margaret carry that uncertainty for the rest of her life, and I don't want you to contribute to that kind of pain in someone you love. Number 2, be where you are. This seems obvious until the moment you realize you almost never do it. When you are having dinner with your family, have dinner with your family. Don't answer messages under the table.
When you are listening to someone speak, truly listen without formulating your reply while they are still in the middle of their sentence. When you are with your kids, be with them. Don't just have your body there while your mind is at work or on social media or on tomorrow's problems. Total presence is one of the rarest gifts you can give another person, and at the same time, it is one of the freest things in existence. It costs no money, it requires no special talent, it only requires the decision to be here, right now, in this moment, with this person, without splitting your attention with anything else. And this decision, repeated every single day over the course of years, is what builds the kind of relationship that, at the end of your life, you call your greatest wealth. Number 3, resolve what's left hanging. Do you have an old argument that was never truly settled? A relative you haven't spoken to in years over something you can barely remember how it started? A friend you drifted away from without a reason big enough to justify the loss? A father or mother you hold a grudge against for something that happened decades ago? I'm not telling you that you need to pretend the pain doesn't exist or accept behavior that was genuinely wrong. I'm telling you that carrying the weight of resentment takes up space inside you that could be used to build something real. Reconciliation isn't always possible, but forgiveness, which is different from reconciliation, internal forgiveness, the act of dropping the weight so it stops dragging you down, that is always possible, and it is always a choice. I lost years of a relationship with my younger brother over a dispute about my father's inheritance that, looking from where I am now, seemed so petty I can barely believe it was enough to create a distance of nearly a decade.
We eventually repaired the relationship, but we never got those years back. Number 4, invest time in the people who matter as if it were the most profitable investment of your life, because it is. You think twice before spending money on something that won't last. Do you think the same way before spending time on things that don't nourish the relationships that are the foundation of your life? The time you spend with the people you love is not wasted time. It is not time taken away from more important things. It is the most important thing, disguised as simple, hidden in the ordinary routine of a dinner that seems mundane, but is in fact where life truly happens. Late-night conversations, Sunday lunches, phone calls for no special reason. The visits you make not because you have something to sort out, but simply because you wanted to see the person. That is the fabric of a well-lived life, and that fabric is woven thread by thread, day by day, not in grand occasional gestures, but in small, repeated presences over time. If any word I've said here has made a difference to you, if you got something from this that will change anything about how you treat the person you love most when you close this video, then do one thing for me. Leave a like down below and share this with someone you feel needs to hear it. Don't share it as a criticism. Share it as a gift. As a 98-year-old veteran asking you not to reach the end of your life with a heart full of unsaid things and moments that should have happened but didn't. And subscribe to this channel if you want to keep hearing these kinds of conversations, because as long as I have the voice and the clarity to speak, I won't stop speaking. I am 98 years old. I survived World War II. I carried the memory of men who died before saying what needed to be said. I wasted years being present in body but absent in soul. And then I learned. Late, but I learned. And the years I lived present, truly present, were enough to give me the peace I am feeling right now, in this chair, looking out the window at a garden that Helen planted and that my son has tended to since she left. I have no regrets about the love I gave. I only regret how long it took me to give it. You still have time to avoid that regret. Use that time with the right people, the right way, now.